Well, this is great. I'm seeing lots of people join, so we're gonna have a good time here. So welcome to It's Not You, It's the Process. If you are looking for a session entitled something about Mojo, reclaiming your mojo or something like that, that was an old title, and we've revised it. Same underlying content though, so you're still in the right place. So breaking bad habits in tech teams. I'm Dave Hansen-Lang. I work with Four Kitchens. We are a web agency. I have been working on the web for more than 20 years, been working with higher ed for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. Uh, and yeah, I live in Ottawa, Canada, and wonder if I'm the only Canadian on the call. And so I'm giving you messages from afar. And
I'm Joanna Sandrowski, and I updated the slide. I am not the director of technical strategy.
oh my goodness,
I am a senior project manager here at Four Kitchens as well. I'm based out of Boston, Massachusetts, and I have been working in the higher ed space, at least the technology space, for 10 years. And prior to that, I was a professor at various Boston universities. So I've been in some realm in the higher ed space for also close to 20 years now.
So this means we can't fool you all. We've been editing our slides right up until just now. Have you made any more edits, Joanna? Should I restart the presentation?
Just the what, just my
Uh,
title.
okay,
But I'll take the promotion. I like it.
yeah. So we are everything that we're going to talk about today is not our original ideas. You know, all of us working on the web, we work a lot with open source stuff. We pull stuff in from all over the place. And that's exactly what we're doing here. Everything that we're talking about today comes from the wider product management community. And we don't talk about product a lot when we talk about web stuff. I think we should a little bit more. And so we're going to dive into that. And we'll at the end we'll give you some more references about where all these ideas come from. So first, let's open it up a little bit and talk about who's in the room. This isn't just an icebreaker because we are going to do a little bit of real-time research here. We're going to do a survey and find out a little bit about how each of us do our work and how it's turning out for us. And so this will help us understand those results if we first find out who we all are. So we could look at this a couple different ways. Probably most of us are in higher ed here, but I don't want to assume that. So maybe first off, is there anyone here who isn't in higher ed? And if so, where are you from? Like what industry do you work in? Or should I guess I just have to assume that everybody here is in higher ed. Okay. Well, that'll that'll actually help out this research because like we should be able to see some real trends in the results here.
And we do
Okay, so
have Justin and nonprofit
oh, do we have people
in the
saying stuff in the
chat.
chat? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we've got one person from a nonprofit. I'm guessing the rest of us are higher ed. Okay, so both of those are things that are not super focused on profit or commerce and that sort of thing. What we're going to try and do is learn from our colleagues who work in the for-profit space and how they think about things and the things that we might be able to pull from that. So another way that we might look at who's in the room is what your role is. And in theory, everything that we're going to talk about today can apply to just about anybody, whether you're like in the C-suite or like somewhere in the middle or you're an individual contributor. Maybe let's start at the top. Anybody here think of themselves as someone who's in the C-suite, chief marketing officer, chief information, chief IS. We got one person in the room. Uh, and okay, and what about, oh, I lost my speaker notes. What about anyone who is like a manager of other people, or you're the person who's accountable for your web project? Anybody like that? See a few hands and a few thumbs up. Okay, do we have any individual contributors, developers, designers, UX strategists, things like that? We've got a couple hands. Okay, great. So I think it sounds like we're about 50-50 in those last two categories. Anybody else who feels like they're different from the rest of us in some way? No. Okay. So I wonder if we're going to see uh, kind of two different trends based on that kind of stuff. Okay. So let's dive into the meat of what we're going to talk about. How successful was your last big project? Now, myself, Joanna, we're people from an agency who support you all who work in higher ed. Just in case there's anybody else like that in the room, we are going to pretend that we are actually part of the higher ed institutions or nonprofit institutions that we're working with for all these questions, and that'll help us figure this out a little bit. Okay, so I don't know if any of you have been on other sessions today. We are not just going to talk at you for an hour. I've been in those kinds of online conferences before where someone talks at you at Zoom for an hour. Super boring. So we're going to have a lot more interactivity. If you scan this QR code, bring it up on your phone, you're going to get to a Google survey. We're going to go through it all together. Ooh, I see that people are still joining. So you still got a chance to bring this up on your phone. Very, very simple Google form that just has a couple questions. Don't answer the questions quite yet. We're going to talk through them one by one. And then we're going to look at all the data together. I can't see most of your faces. Is there anybody who is having any trouble getting this up on your phone? If so, maybe shout out in the chat and we can just like send you the direct link. Okay, I'm going to assume that y'all got it up on your phone. Thank you, Joanna. Okay. Joanna, why don't you lead us off by talking about this first one? Oh, you're muted.
Forgot the basics to unmute myself. Absolutely. So the first one is the hamster wheel. We all know what that means, where we're focused more on output. We're focused on hours, tasks, requests getting filled, keeping our team members with tasks to do, finishing tickets, accomplishing those nice to haves before verifying that they're needed, versus outcomes, which is getting in higher ed, getting new students to sign up, increasing engagement, increasing subscribers, forgetting that tasks need to help you achieve these outcomes.
All right. Have you experienced this one, the counting house? And by that, we mean an obsession with internal metrics. So here's just some generic internal metrics, but maybe at your school, you've got some other metrics, some sort of metric that you follow, that like if you had to explain it to your brother or your sister who doesn't work for your higher ed institute, like they would just have eyes glazed over or not know what you're talking about. Does your most recent project focus a lot on this kind of thing?
And number three, the ivory tower, I know what our users need. And whether that's stakeholders that you work with, or even sometimes yourself, where you think you know what users need. And it's just generally a lack of customer research, employee stakeholders or C-suite who might claim to know without doing any customer research, or ignoring customer research and allowing personal opinions to get in. So asking questions like, did you create user personas, do user interviews, research the demographics?
Okay, number four, the science lab. Optimization to the exclusion of all else. Do you do a lot of A/B tests? Does A/B testing drive everything that you decide and everything that you do? This is basically how Facebook and Instagram and all the other socials got so addictive. And great, they created crack for us, but uh, they they kind of miss some of the deeper issues that are going on. And does your most recent project fall into this trap?
Next one is the feature factory, an assembly line of features. We built what was asked for, but we're not sure what the purpose of it. This is, I saw something, I want it, and we just keep pumping out features
Yeah,
and no
AI.
one, nobody knows why. Yes, for sure, Carson, AI. I was going to segue straight from Dave's, which is everyone wants a social media feed in their footer, but they don't really know why they want that social media feed in the footer. Only that someone else has it. So pumping out features and not sure about the purpose or how it aligns with the organizational or project goals. And as Carson said, AI is a great example of that.
Number six, the business school. I wonder if we have any business schools here. This can be the overuse of science and data. It's great to have data. There's a lot of things that we can collect data on, but we can't collect data on everything. And so we might be not seeing the full picture if the only thing that we're looking at is the data. Does your project fall into this?
The next is the roller coaster. We all know those fast-paced twists and turns, priorities changing every sprint or within a sprint itself. Tasks get put down or never finished, trying to keep up with new priorities that come in. And sometimes there's no end in sight. And obviously by the end, everyone starts feeling a little nauseous.
People on this roller coaster look like they're having fun, but if you've been on this road before, like you know that it's not fun. Next one, the bridge to nowhere. I think this one comes up a lot sometimes in web where we've got great ideas about how to build something and we're great at building things and we do more and more building things and well, are we building too much? Is it the right balance of building things? Are we optimizing for things that might happen but end up never happening? Like, for example, a complicated approval system where everything's got to go through many steps, but there's only one piece of content that's ever in review.
The negotiating table, trying to keep everybody happy. Everyone's got voices and opinions and thoughts, and it oftentimes slows the process, which leads to working on things that really the least number of people dislike or hate. And everyone is an expert, causing you to be stuck in endless negotiations.
And our last one, number 10, the throne room, where you have some high level stakeholder who whipsaws decision back and forth from one idea to another. I know we don't see this in modern times in our culture at all, but has your project experienced this? Sometimes called the swoop and poop, where a seagull comes in to your beach party, poops, and then flies away. Have you experienced this? Okay, and then our last question, which one holds you back the most? So I'm going to slowly scroll back through these just so you can get a reminder from the images and whatnot about what each was. Which one holds you back the most? Gotta just pick one. Okay, everybody decided? Now, don't forget to hit the submit button, because if you don't hit the submit button on a Google form, we don't get the data. And then we can bring up the results.
Can you share the URL with me? I'm sorry, I came in a little late.
Yeah, it's in the meeting chat, Zoom chat. You might not get the past chat if you just joined.
I just
Um,
resent it. You should
yeah.
see it now. Excellent.
But actually, maybe before we look at the numbers, why don't we open it up? Anybody got any initial impressions? What are you thinking and feeling after looking at those 10?
I would
Don't
probably
be
say
afraid.
I would say the roller coaster. Just my experience with Drupal being an enterprise, and I know with I'm in government and there's higher ed, smaller teams. I feel like roller coaster is a popular one.
Someone in the chat says they feel seen. That's the thing. We I meant to say this earlier, but like I first started coming to these Drupal camps 20 years ago, and at the time, like there was hardly anyone in the room who was older than 30. But now, if we look around, we're getting a little bit older, but that means that we've gone through some more ups and downs, and we've seen some more things, and we're starting to see some patterns that these 10 things they're not all that surprising to us. But let's take a look at the results. Okay, so this is where things panned out, and I think this means that there might have been a few zeros. We're definitely clustering on the roller coaster, hamster wheel, and the negotiating table. I will tell you that I just gave the same presentation last week at Drupal Camp Ottawa. Those were the same three that were at the top there. So not it's interesting that we are all kind of falling into the same things. Anybody else have some comments now seeing the trends and where we're all lining up? Okay, let's look at where we called it the most. Getting some clustering for the hamster wheel here, but also the bridge to nowhere and the feature factory. Oh, coloring isn't working quite so good. Okay, roller coaster is actually number one, and then the hamster wheel. Any comments now? What are you thinking and feeling? The online audience is a little bit quieter than my in-person audience was last week. They had a lot to say. They all wanted to like share their war stories.
I'll advocate for the throne room. I know that at certainly at Stanford and at other higher education institutions where I've worked, the faculty hold the power, and the faculty are focused as they should be on research, teaching, and they are not focused on website projects 100% of the time like web agencies are. And so there's often projects can be impacted by faculty coming in and expressing wishes and changing the direction of a project quite dramatically.
Yep, for sure. Anybody who's worked with faculty knows those experiences. Anybody else? Surprised there isn't more people who just want to commiserate. Oh yeah, I've seen that. Let me tell you about it.
I'll say I'm just relieved that I'm not alone. When I first started Drupal, I was on we started Drupal 8 and we went from ASP.NET, and the guy I was working with became my manager. And so I was working on Drupal by myself for 5 years and didn't come to any Drupal events. And I just felt so alone because it was like, what am I doing here? Like I'm managing things by myself, and I had no one on my team that knew anything about Drupal, and so it's the last couple of years. It's been good to know that I'm not alone. That this is actually a common thing.
All right. I will tell you that it's not even just a Drupal thing. I think it's a like any technology project kind of thing.
Albert, were you going to share something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say the one part you said about the social media footer or is that Feature Factory maybe? Whichever one that was, I definitely have seen that happen. And there's a lot of times it's like, okay, but why are we doing that? And well, that's what we should be asking. But a lot of times we'll get to that place where it's like they ask for it, let's do it, and then you kind of wonder why.
Mhm.
And so that's all. That's something that definitely spoke to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Someone else did that thing, so we should too.
Mhm.
Hmm.
I'm sure there was a reason for it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we can talk more as we continue to go through this. But let's take a look at why we're all experiencing these same things. So if what I'm going to propose here is that each of these things, it's all about the process and about the way the whole thing comes together and whether we're strong or weak in certain areas. So this kind of five grouping ways of looking at this process, it comes from the, like I said before, from the product management community. And I, I really resonated with this when I saw this. I really enjoy frameworks in general. If anybody can help me like understand how to like break down a super big problem, it's like, oh, we're making a website for a higher ed institution. We've got to like engage our student populace. Like, how do we engage students? Like that's a mushy, big, scary problem. Like, how do you break that down into something we can actually do something with? And so this is how the product management community uh, approaches that kind of problem. And the first step is identify. So taking a look at the big picture, what is it that we're trying to do? For some websites in higher ed, actually for most higher ed websites, that's around potential students and bringing on potential students. But not all higher ed websites. We got a mix of higher ed websites, higher ed institutions here, I'm guessing. And so that's going to be different whether you're from California State University or from Stanford. And you're going to have different priorities and different overall goals that you're trying to achieve. John talked about faculty and uh, how big of a voice and a purpose you want to give to the faculty priorities versus bringing in new students, and that's going to be different for everybody. And that's part of it. And that part, I think we all understand if we think about it for a little bit. But then there's this other side. What do your visitors, what do your visitors want to accomplish? And there's overlap with what the organization wants to achieve and what the visitors do, but it's not entirely the same thing. Think about potential students, for example. Like the organization wants to bring in new students and help students find courses and all those things. But if I'm a potential student, what do I want? Well, yeah, I want to find a program and stuff, but I want more than that too. I want to find an identity in my school. I'm looking for a path to a career. And those kind of warm, fuzzy things, like there's no metric that's going to capture that, but we can't forget about those things too. And so this step is all about trying to get into that, figure it out. What's more important? What makes our organization different from the like the abstract, uh, general higher ed institution, and dive into those questions. And so then after you've got that, where do you go from there? So then the next step is envision a future. So I'm guessing that most of us in the work that we do, day-to-day work, make some changes, make some improvements, going on, doing things. And I don't know if you can really put a number on these things, but if you had to, like, you'd maybe say, oh yeah, we're making things 5% better or 10% better over some period of time. Well, we are entering an economic downturn, and it's about to get a lot harder for higher ed in our current political climate these days. And so 5 or 10% that we've been doing over time isn't going to cut it anymore. We've got to take bigger and bolder steps, because if all we're showing to the outside world is that we're getting 5 or 10% better, our department's going to get cut, our school's going to merge with some other school, uh, our our school within the university might get closed down and merged into another school. And so we've got to think a much bigger. The way that Stanford is nestled in Silicon Valley, the way that the Silicon Valley people will think about this is, okay, how do we make a 10 times improvement over where we are now? You're not going to hit 10 times, and that's okay. If you hit 3 times better than where you are now, that's going to be groundbreaking and a lot more impactful than the 5 or 10% improvement that we're getting right now. And so envision what that would look like, and actually like map it out, and not just in a hopeful way, like, oh, I wish we brought in 10 times more students, but like, what would that actually look like? And then comes the hardest section of it all: strategize. And we're only going to be able to briefly get into this. There's whole books and lots of stuff within the product management community about this. But a really popular approach to taking on something super big that you can't really understand how to take the next step is to instead work backwards. Okay, you've got this 10x goal that's humongous. Well, what would be the last step to get to that 10x goal? And then the second last step, and then the third last step, and the fourth last step. And eventually you've got all these steps. I'll just flip it around the other way. Now you know how to take the first step on that journey. Again, this is only surface level. There's so much more to dive into here in the strategize section. Prioritize. So now you've got this plan. Prioritize. You're not going to only be able to focus on this 10x thing. You still got the day-to-day stuff, and we've got to somehow make some hard decisions to continue to move you towards that 10x goal. And sometimes that's going to mean saying, hey, Bob from the other department, that request that you made is just not going to happen. We are focusing on the 10x stuff right now. And so sometimes you got to make those hard conversations and not try to please everybody all at once. And then finally build it. In the Drupal and WordPress communities, like we're pretty strong at this. We've got this process kind of figured out. We've really incorporated Agile a lot into the ways that we work. And so we're generally pretty strong here, and that plays out in the 10 things that we saw earlier in our groupings there. But it's all about getting the right people in the process in place. Okay, so let's dive into this a little bit more. What the heck does those 5 things have to do with those challenges that we're all experiencing? Well, like I said, it's all about being strong or weak in one of those areas. So the first one, hamster wheel.
So the hamster wheel. So talking back about just constantly outputting tasks and activities. So you're focused on output, which means you're probably prioritizing and building really well, but you are struggling to identify, envision, and strategize. Or alternatively, you have a team that is working on the vision and strategy and they're talking, but are the people who are working and prioritizing and building talking to the people who are doing the first three steps? So it's one or the other. Either the first three steps don't exist or the two teams aren't talking to each other.
Yeah, and by definition of the hamster wheel, you're running and running, but you're not getting anywhere. And so like, have you figured out where you're going? Are you constantly talking about where it is that you're trying to go? And then as long as you're making progress, you're not on a hamster wheel anymore. You're actually moving somewhere. The counting house. I don't think this came up a lot in our results. But if you are really strong at metrics and making things happen that feed back into the metrics, maybe you're just missing, this first part, like when I talked about like those things that are hard to quantify about what your students or your site visitors are really wanting. It's easy to forget about those things, especially as technology people. Those feelings aren't stuff that we really talk about a lot. And so like if you can dive into that a little bit more, then you can get away from the counting house.
And the ivory tower. So this is when, whether it's a stakeholder or product owner, or you think you know what's best for users without doing the research, are you really thinking about outcome and vision? And then how are you prioritizing those tasks without customer research or an understanding of what your users need?
Okay, the science lab. You can't iterate your way to innovation. We talked about how this is can often look like A/B testing. You can A/B test and make it a little improvements here and there, but that's not going to get you something that is truly transformational if you're just taking things little steps at a time.
The feature factory. I know this was a big one. So you're probably good at like setting, strategizing the pieces or setting the big goals, but if you're just outputting features, do the outcomes and visions, do you know what the outcomes and visions you're even trying to accomplish? And how are you prioritizing and building them? Are you measuring anything or the right thing? It's hard to say if you're just focused on features.
The business school, overuse of science and data. It sounds like maybe you're great at prioritizing things, especially if you've got a lot of data and know what's going to make the biggest impact. But can you think more about the higher level goals that you're trying to achieve?
The roller coaster, another one that was voted on a lot. So oftentimes you're building things and you keep shifting to build another thing or new things without talking about any of the four things: outcomes, vision, strategy, and priorities. And if you are doing these four steps, then you'll feel like it's less like a roller coaster, because we all really want a slightly more steady ride, maybe not the roller coaster, maybe the small world at Disney World, the little boat ride that goes at the same tempo. Obviously that's not realistic at all, but you do want to find that balance between the two.
The bridge to nowhere, over engineering for future unknowns. So it sounds like you're really great at building stuff, but it sounds like maybe you're not building the right things. And so it's all about figuring the right things to build and making sure that there's really a close tie-in between building stuff and the purpose behind it.
I'm on mute. The negotiating table. So you're continuing to negotiate and keep everyone happy. So you probably aren't prioritizing because you feel like you can't push back. So you're in a constant loop of outcome, vision, strategy, and not executing on the priorities and not building on them. And this one is more about being able to sell the ideas, empower the team to say no, and tell the stakeholders are happy because customers are happy, customers and users are happy, because you've thought about them and you've identified vision and strategized towards what they need.
Saying no to those distracting needs is so hard.
But also can be fun.
The throne room, whiplash decisions. So sometimes what's going on here is that there isn't really a lot of tie-in, again, between the people making those decisions and the people who are making it happen. And if you can set things up early really well and come up with a clear idea of the things that you're trying to accomplish, if it's showcasing faculty work is the number one thing, or if it's bringing in new students, and we're always talking about that number one priority thing, whether that's talking up in the chain to the stakeholders or down in the chain to the individual contributors. If there's always talking about that and always alignment on it, then this is going to be less of an issue because everyone's just going to be aligned. Okay. So where to go from here? We've got these 5 areas where we all need to do a little bit of work in different ways. And we only just briefly touched on it, but where can we go? So like I mentioned, a lot of this stuff comes from product management. Here's a couple recommendations. So Prodify is an organization that does a lot of stuff in this space and helps people like us become more product driven. Silicon Valley Product Group, again, has some, like this model, some other different models that can help us understand these really huge problems that are hard to overcome. And if you just want to search for some videos and that sort of thing, look for Marty Kagan. He is probably the foremost thinker on all things product. And yes, people in the product community call him Uncle Marty. And what would Uncle Marty say? And he's got some great videos and talks on the web. All right, we've been talking for a while. It's probably time to open things up again. What are you all thinking and feeling now that you look at these and where you might be strong and where you might be weak? Does this ring a bell? Do any of these things scare you? Go ahead, Sarah.
Hey guys. I thank you very much for sharing. It's a really good presentation. And yeah, it definitely felt seen in a number of ways. I was a little bit embarrassed about the number of boxes that I was checking on the form, actually. What do you think about how should we think about mapping some of the solution techniques to the project management methodology that we might choose? Sometimes we run waterfall, sometimes we run agile. I had a stakeholder tell me one time Agile was just an excuse for never getting promises made, never meeting our commitments. So I'm curious on your thoughts on the methodology versus the best process to use.
Yeah, I think that mostly like the agile versus waterfall debate, I think that mostly just lives here. And it's so easy to get caught up on that and then forget like, oh, like researching to figure out what potential students want is like so far outside of agile versus waterfall, that it's easy to forget that like, oh, like agile versus waterfall, we just pick the one that works for us and then we're done. Well, like No, not at all. Like there's so much more that we need to figure out if we really want to be successful.
Thank
I
you.
do I do think there are ways though with once you are within the build to reference back to your goals or your vision within that methodology, whether it's referencing it in if you're using boards or tasks, making sure you reference back to those things so it gives the task that you're working on meaning in a sense. So I think there is a way to implement them within the build to make sure you're hitting all those 4 steps before that.
Great point.
Albert, I see your mouth moving.
You asked about something scary. It could be looked at as scary, but I'm thinking the envision because you said 10x. I know there was the thought of kind of thinking bigger. It's easy to say, yeah, we could just iterate, and like you said, even align with agile, like, hey, let's keep iterating. We'll get to something. It'll be innovative. It'll be great. Let's get something out. But if the vision wasn't a big grand vision and that something that you was working to, this it still won't lead to innovation. So it's almost like it's like think big, basically. Like how can we think about the bigger a really big impact we can make, and then start to strategize, prioritize, and build it. I think sometimes that's an area where it could be scary to think too big, like, it's going to take too long, or it's gonna be too many stakeholders involved. It'll never get done. I see that as an area that's like, to meet the 10x outcome is not as easy as it feels. Like you can set a vision that you can build, and it's very clear. It's like that's very easy to do. But how can you envision something that might not be as clear, but it would get like a tremendous amount of more outcome, or be a tremendous amount of more impactful? Yeah, and I agree. That's how you would get to something that's really innovative in that step.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, and one thing, like you didn't really say it, but you kind of implied it that 10 times the result is going to take 10 times the work.
Yeah, I
And
think
I
so.
don't think that's necessarily the case. Like again, if we look at Silicon Valley,
Hmm.
uh, Silicon Valley startup that hasn't reached supersize yet, like uh, they're figuring out like what is the smallest amount of work that we can do to make the biggest impact. And it's often not the stuff that we're doing now that is going to get us to that 10x, but it's not 10 times the work either. It's figuring out how to be smart about doing the right work.
Yeah, working smarter, not harder. I agree. What you just said really just stuck out. Just again, I'm saying, like, I think a lot of time that seems scary because we attach 10x outcome with 10x amount of work, when we maybe need to think like we're gonna do probably the same amount of work over the same amount of time, regardless. So really being mindful of what is that work that we're doing during that time we have to get the most value out of it. So yeah, I agree that seems scary when you try, because most of the time mindset will go to like, oh, that means we're gonna have to do more versus stops. Okay.
For sure. Jen, what's on your mind?
I was thinking, sorry, I was thinking it's interesting what you said about doing 10 times the impact type work. And then later on, you were suggesting about how to think about it, which is start at your end goal and then work your way backwards. And then it brought to mind the idea of 10,000 steps, I think is what it's called, like where you break things down and like not so much where I want to be, but what can I do this week? Because where I want to be in 10 times as much work is too big. Like your mind kind of shuts down. So, what can you do this week that works your way to that goal? Except thinking about it backwards, what you were saying. And the backwards part is what kind of tripped me up. I'm having a hard time envisioning going backwards.
Yeah. But it kind of ties into the iterative thing again. Like if we're just taking one of those 10,000 steps at a time, Like we're just going to continue to see that small incremental growth. And so instead, what are we actually aiming for? Something bigger. Who else has something on their mind? I know you higher ed people. I know you like to talk.
One quick thing that just came to mind from what Jen said, right? Like, so if the goal was like we want to get to a place and we knew, okay, it take 10,000 steps to get there. So we start walking like, okay, if we break down 10,000 steps and we walk X amount of steps every day, we'll get there in a year. I'm just making up something. But maybe we could sit and say, you know what? Maybe we could figure out a way to fly and get there tomorrow. And like we don't have to take 10,000 steps at all. It may take us a week to build a plane and get there. Like I think that could be a way to look at it. If that's just one way to get there, but like you may even have to look at the end goal. Like was the goal really to walk 10,000 steps or was the goal to get to wherever we were trying to get to? And I think sometimes we might start thinking of like breaking down the process that we know to get there in 10,000 steps. We know we can get there in 10,000 steps if we keep walking there. But like if we step back, like why should it take 10,000 steps? Like there might be new technology that it might be some new shoes or some type of thing that could get there a lot faster. But we get caught up in like, yeah, last time we did this, if I look at this metric and no, it's 10,000 steps. And that's like a very solid process. We know we can follow that. That's safe. We know we can get there. But it's like may, maybe we're doing it taking too long. Like, why are we still doing it that way?
For sure. Uh, one just to take us in a bit of a different direction. Like, it didn't seem like there were many like other people here from web agencies or like web consultancies. So let me speak to you from that perspective for a little bit. Uh, as someone coming in from the outside and trying to help you along, there's only so much here that I can do. I can like use all my best like um, behavioral economics and nudge theory to like, hey, what do you think about this? And like, do we really know what our stakeholders want? And I can ask those kinds of questions, but I can only take it so far, and I can only nudge you so much. You all have to uh, be strong and continue to think about stuff up front in these kinds of areas, because those groupings that we saw in the 10 challenges, I think they were mostly from being weak here. And so you've really got to like lean into this and um, build up build up some skills and build up some tools in these areas to really make that impact that we're all hoping for. Anybody else have any thoughts and ideas? Okay, well, earlier I spoke a little bit about how like we're all getting a little older. So let me speak to the younger me. If I was in the audience here and I heard this talk and I was like 5 or 10 years ago, I would be feeling some serious imposter syndrome that like, oh man, I'm really good at building stuff. I don't even know how to think about this kind of stuff. And if it's any consolation, if I can learn some of these kinds of things, then I'm sure you all can too. And whatever you learn in these areas is going to help you regardless of what you're doing in your life, whether it's parenting or like helping to run your local community group in something like this is going to pay off in many different ways. So I encourage you to just go out there and then try and figure it out and make it happen.
It's a true story about using it in real life. I just used it on my in-laws to convince them to downsize. I did a whole discovery with Post-its and stickers and applied a lot of this methodology, and we finally came to a consensus. So helping them figure out their next phase of life.
I have a question for you guys since you're on the outside. How do you guys manage um, large organizations? And so, like inside my organization, I'm the web developer, and there's a team of three, and we manage different departments. And in our organization, even though I'm the developer and I do my best to work with them on what's best, a lot of the times they're in charge of the content, so it's a little ridiculous when they ask me how to make a PDF more optimized, and I'm telling them we have to, how to optimize a file, but they're advocating for the highest quality file that's PDF that's 200 pages, and they don't want to split it up. They don't want to do. So we're talking about like just the highest quality 200-page PDF that's 80 megs, and they're not happy. And so I'm not in charge of the content. How do you guys manage that? How do you guys, because it's part of also I'm trying to teach others, but not everyone is always interested in doing it the right way. They want to do it their way, and I get that's, especially in my field of work, it's user experience to some of my internal customers means making their workflow easier, not actually making it easier for the customers. So how do you guys manage that?
Yeah, so there's some tricks that I try and use. The kind of the simplest thing is just to ask questions that will lead to where you're trying to get to. And it like it sounds like you're really in deep in the build kind of section of this. And so if you can just pause and ask people, hey, like to help me figure out how to be most effective, can you tell me about what our highest level goals are here, or something like that, to not tell them how to do things, but to ask the information that you're hoping for that's going to help you get to the place that you think you're trying to get to.
Awesome, thanks.
And I'd even say, because we also do content strategy, and I just actually sent this to a client this afternoon. We utilize basically a template. We call it page tables, so that it structures it in a way that it asks them questions and it forces them to think about things and think about kind of the big picture. And so, I find that that can be helpful. Even, I don't know what form these requests come to you, but even having like a form that asks some extra questions so that it does make them kind of reflect for a second. And they're still easy questions. It's not going to take them, it's not going to be a barrier for them to get what they need done, but making them think a little bit differently, because like you said, they're worried more about their editor experience and not always about the users. And that's pretty typical of content, people who are just content editors.
More questions that are starting to come to mind that are great to ask is, okay, if our higher goals are this, is the work that we're doing actually making a difference? When we make a change, does it actually improve the higher level goals that we're aiming for? How do we know? Are we measuring anything? Are we measuring the right things? Are we looking at the measurements? And sometimes just continuing to lead question one after another like that can help everybody think about things a little bit different.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all, and thank you for participating. If anybody thinks about anything a little bit differently after this, then I am super happy, because that's all I'm after.
Thank you everyone for joining.
All right. Good luck.
Bye all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.